المداد يا الله اسقينا بالمداد يا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد، قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم تنزيله في شأن حبيبه مخبرا وآمرا: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Welcome inshallah to this very auspicious session, and I say auspicious simply because of who it's linked to and about whom it is. This is essentially a short talk about a little bit about the life and times of Sayyiduna wa Sanaduna wa Imamuna al-Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jeelani wa al-Jili rahimahullah ta'ala, also known famously as Al-Ghawth Al-A'zam, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well, inshallah ta'ala. And I would have liked to have read a poem, but inshallah I think I may do that at the end. If not, I recommend those that are listening, and if somebody can remind me at the end, I'll send a reminder recommendation to go to Sidi Mudassir's YouTube page, Sidi Mudassir from High Wycombe. He has a YouTube page called Love's Pilgrim, and on this YouTube page, Love's Pilgrim, he has a manqabat in our language, which is essentially an ode of praise for, as he entitles it, King Jilani. So you can go and have a look at have a look at that, and it's very nice. I would have liked to have read a poem, but inshallah, if I find it, I'll recite it at the end, inshallah. Okay, so first let's begin. Where do we begin with Sayyidi Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jeelani rahimahullah ta'ala? So his kunya is Abu Muhammad. He has a lot of children, which we'll look at later on. He has a very large family by the end of his life, radiyallahu anhu, which we'll have a look at. But he's famously known as Muhyiddin. Now, this could be his name, obviously, but also the fact that he was given this title as Muhyiddin because he revives the deen, particularly in Baghdad. But arguably, he makes such a stamp on the tradition of Islam, which I'll go into in a little bit detail later, that it simply is remarkable. There's nobody in the history of Islam that is quite like Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. So he was born in an area, he's Persian of origin. He's born in an area called Jilan, sometimes pronounced as Jil, so he's sometimes called Jilani or Jili. So this is a province in Iran that he's born in, radiyallahu anhu warda. Now what's most amazing about Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani is his lineage, because he's a Hassani and Husseini Sayyid. What does that mean? So to be a Sayyid or a Sharif can be extended, a more extensive title. This is somebody that is from the family of the Holy Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, either directly through his lineage, or it could be through the Banu Muttalib. So like Imam al-Shafi'i radiyallahu anhu warda, one of the 4 Imams of Islamic law, he is Matlabi. So they're also considered Sharifs from that broad family. But the actual line of the Sayyids, these come through the daughter of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. We know that the Prophet ﷺ has 4 daughters and 3 sons. 3 of those daughters and all 3 of those sons pass away in his lifetime. Only one of them outlives him, and that's Sayyidah Fatima al-Batul al-Zahra alayhi salam, and from her does the lineage continue. Even though Sayyidah Zainab did have a daughter, Sayyidah Umama, but the lineage does not continue through her. lineage only continued through Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha wa alayhi salam. So he is Hassani and Husseini. This is because his father, Shaykh Abu Salih Musa, his father is Hassani. So his lineage goes back to Imam Hassan. The Prophet ﷺ's daughter, Fatima, is married to Sayyidina Ali. Sayyidina Ali and Sayyidina Fatima, they have Hassan and Hussein, 2 sons. Sayyidina Zainab is a daughter. Hassan and Hussein. Lineage continues from Imam Hassan and lineage continues from Imam Hussein. If you were to come from the lineage of Imam Hassan, you are called a Hassani Sayyid. And if your lineage comes through Imam Hussein, then you are a Husseini Sayyid. Sayyidi Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani is both Hassani and Husseini. So his father is Abu Salih Musa, so he's a direct descendant of Imam Hassan. Whilst his mother, Sayyida Ummul Khair, Fatima, what a beautiful name, Ummul Khair, the mother of goodness, which could be taken literally and it can be taken metaphorically, because sometimes they use, in Arabic, sometimes they use the term Abu something. For example, let's say somebody is very brave, they'll say he's Abu Shuja'a, he's the father of bravery, and this is like an honorary title. Whereas you can literally be Abu Shuja'a, your son could be named Shuja'a. So for her, we can say that her son is Khair, Sayyidi Abdul-Qadir Jeelani, but also it could be honoring her. His mother and father, in fact, their story of how they get married is very interesting. It's a very popular story about the father of Sayyid Abdul-Qadir Jeelani, that he's walking through a farm or some land, and he sees an apple on the floor. He picks it up, he eats it, or he takes a bite. He's immediately filled with guilt because he doesn't know where the apple came from. He feels as though, well, it must have fallen off someone's tree, so I should really find out where this apple came from, and I should ask permission, and I should apologize for taking a bite out of the apple without seeking permission. So he follows the trail, he gets to the house, and so when he meets this man, he says to him, look, I want to apologize, I had your apple, please can you forgive me? He says, I will forgive you, but the condition is that you have to work for me. Now there are different reports about how long this was. I mean, I think the minimum of which is like a few years. But whatever it may be, imagine working for somebody for an hour for an apple, like really? You know, a day for an apple, like really? But years and years, and some of them go very high, like 10 years, 15 years of he worked for this man. And after which he says to him, look, I fulfilled my duty to you, etc. You know, am I free to go now? And he says, well, there's one more thing that you must do. You must marry my daughter. And then he describes his daughter as someone that is blind, somebody that is deaf, that is dumb, that is unable to speak, etc. And so the man, because he has this taqwa of he wants forgiveness in this world. I mean, this is very, for us, this is like abstract. Like when I'm talking about this, it's like abstract, it's like theoretical. But for these people, it was practical. They lived this. May Allah give us tawfiq to understand our tradition. And so he says to him, fine, you know, even if this is how she is. But when he marries her, when he sees her, he realizes this is not the case. And this was a metaphor the man was using to highlight the fact that she had not seen haram due to her piety. She had not heard haram due to her piety. That she had never spoken a word of haram due to her piety. That this was her level of taqwa and piety. And so that they were befitting. There was kufu here. There was suitability for them. And so in this way, they get married, radiyallahu anhuma. And from them comes Sayyidina Abdul-Qadir Jeelani. And you know, try this. Go through the books of tabaqat, of biographies of the great ones in our ummah. Whenever you find a great saint, always look back to the parents of that saint, particularly the mother. The father too, particularly the mother. When you think of Imam al-Shafi'i, his father had passed away. It was his mother that took him to Makkah Mukarramah, put him into the majalis. Then it was his mother that took him to the gatherings of Imam Malik as a small boy. She put a big turban on his head, and she pushed him into the gathering of Imam Malik ibn Anas radiyallahu anhu. Whenever you think of the great ones, I think it was the mother of Imam al-Suyuti, one of the muhaddithin, I think it was Imam al-Suyuti, that she sent him off. And he came back from his studies after 30 years. After 30 years, he went off. And when he came and he knocked on the door, and his mother answered the door, she said to him to not come back. And he said, why? And she said, because I gave you for the sake of Allah, and I only will take you back on the Day of Judgment. Again, metaphor for us in the sense that these people were able to give immense amounts of sacrifices, but look at their offspring. Look at what they produced. Today we glorify Imam al-Hasan wal-Hussein. Okay, there's questions coming in. I can see them. And inshallah, what I'll do is when I wrap up, then I'll go through the questions as best as I can, inshallah. So, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. So when we look at these great ones, we also need to look at their parents, and that will answer the question as to how and why they ended up the way that they did. What's also important to understand about, let me explain some terms. So we're going to use the term wilaya or wali. The idea of somebody being we're all awliya as believers. Muslims, Imam al-Tahawi is explicit in his creed that the people of Islam, they are all awliya. Meaning that we all are protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This meaning of one of the meanings of wilaya. By virtue of us saying the shahadatain, we have a level of proximity and closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that's undeniable. You cannot say that a believer and a non-believer are the same. However, when we use the word wali as a technical term, we're talking about somebody that through either divine grace, meaning directly, or either through divine grace but indirectly, this person has achieved a station of knowledge of God that is unlike the people around him or her. And we've had great awliya in our tradition. The likes of Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani, the likes of Imam al-Ghazali, the likes of Sayyida Rabia al-Basriya, the likes of Karima al-Marzawiya. You know, this our Karima is named after the great female saint and Hadith scholar Karima al-Marzawiya. These were great saints that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had gifted this to them, either indirectly or directly. Indirectly, I mean that these are people that worked hard. They worked hard in their lives on themselves, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifted them with wilaya. Some awliya were given it from day one. They were born awliya. Now this does not mean that they did not go through immense amounts of mujahada and training, as we will see a little bit with regards to the life of Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani, but he was a born wali. In fact, his wilaya was foretold, predicted by many awliya before him. Now let me make a point here. We're going to talk a little bit about, I've got so much information here in terms of the miracles of Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani, but I'm not going to touch on more than just a few of them. One thing to note, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, pretty much everybody across the board, illa very few people, Muslims have always believed in mu'jizatul anbiya and karamatul awliya. We've always believed in the miracles of prophets and the miracles of the saints. Now, what these mean individually is a different discussion. What is a karama? As in, what is it there to do? The reason why Allah will give a miracle to a saint is to establish the truthfulness of the prophet of that saint. So if there's a saint and he has a miracle, then that miracle will only be supporting and strengthening the truth claim of the prophet of that saint. The karamat of awliya are haqq. All of the ummah agrees on that. With regards to particular saints, like if I was to say to you that there's such and such saint and this miracle, I can only speculate. I can have good reason to believe that this miracle occurred for this person. But to be absolutely sure, this is very rare that we find this. We do find it. There are people in our tradition, of course there are. Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani, Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani is one of those awliya whose karamat Ibn Taymiyyah says are mutawatira. His karamat are mutawatira, which means that they have been mass transmitted, that we have no reason to deny them. In fact, it's logically unreasonable for us to deny that these miracles happened. The same way you would not deny the testimony that Babylon once existed, or that a certain thing happened, Alexander the Great once existed, Genghis Khan once existed. The testimony that we have, and testimony is a root of knowledge, the testimony that we have is so strong that there's no reason for us to deny it. Ibn Taymiyyah says that the testimony to the karamat, the miracles of Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani are like this. So some of the predictions. So for example, one of the great mashayikh of our ummah, Sayyidina al-Junaid. In the Arab kind of tradition, they call him Imam al-Junaid. In the subcontinental, in the kind of Indo-Pak subcontinental tradition, we call him Junaid al-Baghdadi. You may hear that, Junaid al-Baghdadi. So Imam al-Junaid, who is Sayyid al-Ta'ifatain, as Imam al-Qushayri writes about him, he is the master of the two paths, meaning the path of Sharia and the path of Haqiqah. The path of Sharia and the path of Haqiqah. Meaning that he's the master of the outward of Islam, meaning of Islamic law and jurisprudence and legal theory, etc. But he's also a master of the inward. He's a master of the intention and the murad of all of that outward. The objective and this path of purification, Imam al-Junaid was from the great Imams of that. And so he lives 200 years before Sayyidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani. 200 years before the coming of Sayyidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani. And so once he's in a spiritual state, and people, mashallah, they have spiritual states. I know lots of people in our communities, this is something aam, it's not something unreasonable, that they'll be, at the Haram in Makkah and they have a moment. They have a very strong moment, and sometimes in that moment they are not present. Sometimes, without making a comparison, hasha, sometimes you can have somebody that they're in such a daydream, like they're so worried about something, or they're so happy about something, that they're ecstatic, literally. Nothing can change their mood. You could be tapping them and they're not feeling it. Think about adrenaline. Adrenaline is such a state that you don't even really feel like you don't even feel pain. Sometimes adrenaline gets people through amazing things. So if we think about this idea of al-wajd, that some of the awliya go through, that some people go through. I know people that they've had a moment, they've been at a special place, a blessed place, and they've lost it. In that moment that they felt divine presence, that they forgot, they could not feel what was around them. This is something that people feel. People have these sorts of experiences all the time. There's a documentary that I watched once about people that weren't even Muslims, but people that were in a certain situation or in a place where they may have called out on God. They may have had such an experience where they felt like they were having a kind of out-of-bodily experience, or they were having a type of ecstasy. What then of the people of Islam that understand it and that they know how to achieve it? So he was in this hal, and he starts to say, his foot is on my shoulders, his foot is on my shoulders. So when he comes out of his state, his students and his murid aspirants, meaning his followers, they say, Ya Imam, like, what was that you were saying? Like, what did you say? You went into a kind of state of ecstasy, and you uttered these words. And he said that there's going to be a saint, meaning an Imam, that would be born towards the end of the 5th century. And his name would be Abdul-Qaadir, and his title would be Muhyiddin. He will be born in Jilan, and he will live in Baghdad. And one day, by the command of Allah, he will say that my foot is on the shoulders of the awliya, or of all the awliya. And so now, this is a prediction of the coming of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani. It's reported, which is amazing, by the way. Because even if we don't look at this as a miracle, the fact that these reports existed before he was born. It's interesting. The fact that these statements they existed, they were written down before he was born, is itself remarkable. He's referring to a statement that Sayyidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani said. He said that my foot is on the necks of all of the awliya, highlighting that Allah will grant him a station above all of the saints of this ummah. All of the righteous ones of this ummah, of course, after the companions and those, that generation, and but that he will be afdal, he will be more superior than all of the imams that will come after in the ummah. And this is something that, subhanallah, it doesn't really matter who you are or where you are or what, I don't know what if somebody's part of tariqah or not part of tariqah, or somebody likes Sufism or does not like Sufism, regardless, they will love Abdul-Qaadir al-Jeelani. Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, he was not, people think he was anti-Sufism. He wasn't anti-Sufism. He was anti-Sufis. Like the practitioner Sufis that he was watching, that they were people of bid'ah, of innovation. Much like today. There's a lot of what people will say and do in the name of Sufism that is just bogus. It's like hocus pocus. It has nothing to do with Islam. Any Sufism, any spiritual endeavor or exercise or anything of the sort that is outside the domain of the sacred law of the Sharia, this is unacceptable. Mardud. It's rejected. Whatever is done on the spiritual path must be in line with the teachings of the Holy Prophet. There is no Shaykh greater than him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There is no Imam greater than the Imam of the Holy Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. Khalas. So this is a misconception. So he was refuting them. But in any case, he writes commentaries on the works of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani. He received the khirqa, the cloak, in the Qadri Sufi order. This is ma'ruf, this is documented history, that Ibn Taymiyyah received the khirqa sharif, the blessed cloak within the Qadri Sufi order. But this was a Sufism that was free of innovation and bid'at and misguidance. And this is inshallah the tasawwuf and the Sufism that we should all be following, a Sufism that is rooted in the sacred law. Also Imam Hassan al-Askari. Now this is mind-blowing stuff, because Imam Hassan al-Askari is from the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, Sunni Imams of Ahlul Bayt. Of course the Shia, they have their own understanding of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. But Imam Hassan al-Askari is from one of the great Imams of Ahlul Bayt. And when I say Ahlul Bayt, just in case somebody doesn't know what I mean, Ahlul Bayt is referring to the family of the Prophet. Ahlul Bayt, people of the household of the Holy Prophet. So Imam Hassan al-Askari later on, he's later in the lineage. So Shaykh Abu Muhammad states that before Imam Hassan al-Askari passed away, he handed over his jubba, he handed over his cloak to Imam Ma'ruf al-Karhi, a very famous Sufi saint. And he said to him, pass this to Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jeelani. So Ma'ruf al-Karhi, he passed this cloak over to Imam Junaid al-Baghdadi, who was his student. And Imam Junaid al-Baghdadi had passed it to Shaykh Danuri. And then it was from him that it was passed to Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani in the year 497 Hijri. So this is amazing. So now Hassan al-Askari is also predicting the coming of Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani. Also Shaykh Abu Bakr bin Hawar. Again, I can go on. There are 6 predictions of 6 different awliya that we have documented in history of the coming of Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani. I'll just mention their names without going into detail, for the sake of time. You have Shaykh Abu Bakr bin Hawar, who lists 6 names, of which his students did not recognize one of them, and that was the name of Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jeelani. Also, we have Shaykh Khalil Balkhi and Imam Muhammad bin Sa'id al-Zanjani. Okay. Subhanallah, when Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jeelani mentioned about his own birth, he says, I am al-Jilani, referring to where he was born. My name is Muhyiddin, and my banners fly on mountaintops, and indeed they do. And as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter what anybody believes or follows, they will always find a link back to Sayyidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani. So he begins his studies, his mother puts him into a madrasa. I'll get to these questions near the end about Imam Hassan al-Askari being one of the 11 Imams. So, yes, from the Shia, in short. In the Shia tradition, he's one of the 11 Imams. I mean, we consider them to be Imams too. The only difference between us and the Shia, and it's a big difference, is that we do not believe that these Imams were ma'asum al-khata. We only believe that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and all the prophets before him, that they are free of sin. They are ma'asum al-khata. They do not make sin. They are unable to make sin. Whereas for Ahlul Bayt, Awliya, it may be that they're mahfuz, like that Allah protects them and preserves them, but we do not say that they are ma'asum. Isma is specific to Anbiya. Whereas the Shia, they believe that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt are also sinless, amongst other beliefs that the Shia have that we do not agree with. So, a really beautiful story. We know that the Holy Prophet ﷺ mentioned that when a student of knowledge, and there's lots of people watching this right now, and this is beautiful advice if you haven't heard this. Our Prophet ﷺ said about the student of knowledge that when a student leaves to go and study, the angels place their wings beneath the feet of that person, and that person walks on those wings as they are going to study. And the Holy Prophet ﷺ used to say, "Man kharaja fi talab al-ilm," anyone that leaves for seeking knowledge, he is kana fi sabilillahi hatta yarji', aw kama qala alayhi salatu wasalam. He is in the path of Allah until he returns. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ said, everything in the heavens and the earth, including the fish in the sea, make dua of istighfar, meaning they seek forgiveness for the student of knowledge. If we have come together today to seek knowledge, then inshallah even the fish in the sea will be making istighfar for us. And inshallah the angels will be lowering their wings. Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani, as a small boy, he was 5 years old when his mother put him into the madrasa in Jilan, in Iran. He said, when I was there, I used to see beings of light that used to say, move out the way, the wali of Allah is coming, meaning the saint of Allah is coming. This is why I mentioned at the beginning that Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani was a saint that was gifted sainthood from the beginning. He was born a wali. In fact, when he was born, one of the miracles of his birth is because he was born in the month of Ramadan. When he was born, Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani was born, but during the hours that one should be fasting, that he would refuse to take milk. This is reported in our history about him, radiyallahu anhu warda. And this is because of the honor for the month of Ramadan. So this was something Allah gave him. And this is why you see the name of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani is always mentioned throughout the generations of Islam. So one day, he's 18 years old. He goes out like anyone would, and there's an ox. And he's kind of just following it around. He sees it and he just starts following with it. Kind of like you could say he's playing. And he wasn't known to play much as a child. Even as a child, he'd be playing with children. He would hear a noise telling him that this is not what he should be doing. And he would preoccupy himself in some khair. So he sees the ox, and again he hears that voice that says to him that this is not for you. You were created for something greater than this. And so it was at this age of 18 that he realized that he wanted to do afdal ibadah. Afdalul ibadah. What is the most virtuous of worship? Talab al-ilm, seeking knowledge. And so he went to his mother, who was in her 90s, and he asked her for permission. Sorry, she was 78 years old. And he asked her for permission, can I go and seek knowledge? And she gave him permission. Now she had 80 dirhams or dinars from the inheritance left from his father. So she said, 40 for your younger brother, whose name was Abu Ahmad Abdullah, and 40 for you. She sewed them into his cloak. This is a very famous story. I don't know about many of you guys, but generally many of us from the Indo-Pak subcontinent, this is a story that we've been told since we were children. Like since we were children, this is a story that we knew, which is that Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani is leaving for Baghdad. His mother sews 40 dirhams into his cloak on the inside so they can't be found. And she says to him, I give you one piece of advice. You want to go out and seek knowledge? You want to go out and do what you need to do? Do whatever you need to do. But one piece of advice you must never forget. Do not ever tell a lie. No lying. You must always speak the truth. He promised her that he would speak the truth. Their caravan was qati'ut tariq, highway robbers. That the highway robbers had hijacked their caravan. People used to travel in caravans, because it wasn't safe to travel. There were no planes, trains, cars, etc. We're talking about the end of the 5th century here. So when he's traveling, the caravan is hijacked, and they're asking people, what do you have? Lest they may search you. And even if they were, it was sewn on the inside, they wouldn't have found it. He's asked, what do you have? Do you have anything on you? As people would. What have you got in your pockets? Take it out. So he's asked, what do you have? So he says, yeah, I've got 40 dirhams sewn on the inside. So the story goes that the man says, just why would you even do that? Like, who tells anybody? And he said, well, my mother told me that I couldn't lie. And as the report goes, that impacted the robbers. And we see this actually. There's occasions where people have gone in to commit a crime, and the victim of that crime has responded in such a way that it's impacted the criminal. It's reminded about their fitrah, something within them that they know that they should be doing. So that's a very famous story about Shaykh. So yani from day one, we can see of what he was like. Now what's really interesting is he goes to Baghdad. There is one report to say that when he gets to Baghdad, he's not allowed in. Meaning either he has a dream or he hears a sound that says he mustn't go in, and he spends 20 years waiting outside Baghdad in the wilderness, occupied in his own worship and zuhud and asceticism and uprooting any love for dunya from his heart and to living on absolute minimum. That's one report until he is granted permission to go in. One report is that no, he goes into Baghdad, and this is the you could say that perhaps the stronger report, wallahu alam, and he goes in and he is becomes a student at Madrasa Nizamiya. Madrasa Nizamiya, of course, is famous in Baghdad. Imam al-Ghazali studied there, taught there. Imam al-Juwayni, Imam al-Harawain taught in the Nizamiya. Great imams. I mean, we're talking Juwayni, Ghazali level imams. They studied at the Nizamiya. So Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani, who's by the way contemporary to Imam al-Ghazali. I don't know if there's anybody that's very interested in kind of 5th century history here, but it's actually really interesting to see that although they're contemporary, that they don't. It doesn't seem like they cross paths. They don't mention each other, not that I know of anyway. So he's in this, and that's going to become important later as well. So Sayyidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani joins the Nizamiya where he studies. We have the names of his teachers, etc., with whom he studies, radiyallahu anhu warda. But what's interesting for those of that may be students of knowledge is the kind of hardships that he goes through whilst he is studying. He goes through such poverty. He had spent his 40 dirhams before he had even got to Baghdad. So he joins the madrasa, and anyone that knows student life, they know that student life will always come with challenges. Always. Even if something becomes easier, another thing will become more difficult. If one thing becomes easier, another thing will become more difficult. This is the nature of talabul ilm, of seeking knowledge. Why? Because it's afdalul ibadah. It's afdalul ibadah. And if you think about it, out of all of the nawafil prayers, the nafil prayers, like you could consider one of the greatest of them. There's a difference of opinion on this. Some say the sunnah that are attached to the fard, but one of the greatest is tahajjud. It's tahajjud, even the word tahajjud. If you flip the root letters around, it makes the word juhud, which means struggle, because you have to wake up very early before Fajr to pray. So anything that has this superiority also comes with challenges. More superiority, more challenges. So he says, he got to a point that he said that sometimes he'd be so hungry that he would lay down in the street. He wouldn't be able to walk. He was so hungry. So he said that he would go and he would, after classes, he used to spend the nights in the wilderness, and he used to stand and he used to pray and he used to worship. And he said that I used to go to the river Euphrates and I used to eat whatever vegetables that I could find besides the river. There's one point where he says, this is a quote from Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani himself. He says, the intensity of my hunger was so great that every time the person, so he was watching somebody eat food. So he went to a masjid and this person opened up a parcel of container with fried meat and bread. And he says that every time that he would take a morsel of food to his mouth, my mouth would uncontrollably open with his, and I wish that I also had something to eat. Meaning that he was feeling such hunger. He says, when this continued to happen, I turned to my nafs and I said, do not be impatient. Be patient and trust and have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, after I said this, I felt the hunger go away. Meaning that my nafs was just crying. This is like a subtle ishara towards human capacity. We know, I mean, people through their mujahada, that they are able to go days and weeks and months without eating. Very few people. I mean, we even have people that do certain kinds of training. Even some people that are Muslims, like certain kind of Buddhists, etc., monks, that undergo certain kinds of training, are able to tap into the strength of the human being. And it's amazing because when you see some people that are able to go so far, if they just had iman, if they just had faith, if they had that kind of strength, that willpower, that kind of himmah to do the kind of mujahad they do, if they were able to, jazakallah, if they were able to have iman with that, Qadr Allah ma sha, fa'alul lima yurid. Allah does what He wants. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to always keep us guided upon iman and to protect us from the evil of kufr. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. And so he says that when this happened, the hunger left, meaning that this was all a battle between him and his nafs. So the hunger left, and I didn't want it anymore. He says the man actually comes to me a little while later and he says, hey, look, would you like to share my food with me? I said to him, no, I'm actually okay. Meaning he had passed that stage of hunger. He didn't even feel hungry anymore. And he was like, look, please, he insisted, share some food with me. So Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani said, I shared that food with him. Because we got talking and, where are you from, etc. I told him I'm from Jilan. And he said, hey, you're from Jilan. He says, I'm looking for a young boy here called Abdul-Qaadir. He's from Jilan. He says, I'm Abdul-Qaadir. He says, when I said that to him, the man started to cry. And he goes, I'm really sorry. Because I'm from Jilan too. And your mother sent me with some money to give you. I think he even mentions how much it was. He says that she gave me a certain amount of money to give you. And he says, when I came here, I was looking for you. I couldn't find you. And I ran out of money. And so I actually used that money today because I couldn't find you. I had just resolved to that I wasn't going to find you. And I purchased this food. And says, then he starts to cry. He says, I'm sorry that this was your money and I bought this food with it. And they say Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani says that he was asking for forgiveness, and he said, and it wasn't even a thing for Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani. But the point, the shahid of the story was, the main point of the story was how he was able to get past the desire of his nafs, and he was able to tap into a spiritual state in which he no longer felt the need for anything from this dunya. And what's remarkable is that these things are reported from him through mass transmission, meaning that the Ummah has agreed upon these things with Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jeelani. Some of his spiritual teachers. So this is an important question. Some people say, look, with whom did he learn his spiritual exercises from? So yes, he was born a wali, but look at all the zuhd he is doing in his life. By zuhd, I mean asceticism. With whom did he do it? So one of his teachers was Shaykh Hamad bin Muslim ad-Dabbas. He was one of the great sheikhs of Baghdad, and he became the sheikh of Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jeelani. So this was a time where Baghdad had become troublesome. Now I mentioned earlier that Imam al-Ghazali is going to become I'll get to these questions inshallah. Baghdad became what we would say in Urdu or Farsi is purfitan, meaning it became filled with tribulation. And this was a time where Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani said, you know what, I've had enough of Baghdad, I'm going to go and I'm going to spend my time in the wilderness. So as he was going to leave, he said that he felt a huge push on him. And when he felt this push, he heard a voice. And the voice said to him that this is not a time for you to leave Baghdad, but this is a time that you need to stay in Baghdad because many people will require you. In any case, although his Shaykh was Shaykh Hamad, he also benefited from Abu Sa'id al-Mukharrami. Now, an important point that I must mention here, before I forget it, is when Sidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani had completed his studies at the Jamia Nizamiya, he then spent 25 years roaming around Baghdad. Now, a lot of people say, I'm going to take a little moment on this. This needs to be clarified because a lot of people kind of say that this stuff is like unnecessary. Why would he need to go off to the wilderness? Now, this may be true for some people, but if you look at some of the greatest, if you look at Sayyid al-Awwaleen wal-Akhirin, if you look at the master of the two worlds, Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, our prophet, he would go and spend months within the cave of Hira. This is true or not? In fact, if you look at the hadith in Bukhari, the Badul Wahi, the famous hadith of the beginning of Revelation, what does it say? Go and look at the hadith. Check it up. Go and look at the beginning of Revelation, hadith in Bukhari. What does it say? It says that this was a time that Allah made seclusion in the cave beloved to the Prophet ﷺ. This is a time that he wanted to be alone with his Lord sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then this idea of seclusion, even in Medina Munawwara, by the way, even though once he always was a Nabi, once he proclaimed his prophethood, and I should really focus on that for a second too, because there have been some, very famous da'is, preachers that have said that the Prophet ﷺ was basically a convert, ma'adallah, hasha, astaghfirullah. How did I even utter those words? May Allah forgive me. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned about himself, كنت نبيا وآدم بين الماء والطين, or بين الطين والماء, أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. He said that I was a prophet whilst Adam was between clay and water. That's what he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I was a prophet when Adam was being made. That's when I was a prophet. I mean, to say that the Prophet ﷺ, no, he proclaimed his prophecy at the age of 40. Now, the scholars they differed about whether he knew he was a prophet. They never differed on whether he was a prophet. They all accepted that he was a prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, always. But they differed as to whether he knew it, and the vast majority of this ummah. It's very hurtful to hear those sorts of things, because this is our prophet, and people should be careful when they're speaking about the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Sayyidi Shaykh Muhammad Karam Shah al-Azhari rahmatullah alayhi used to say, the mas'ala for when you're talking about the Prophet, he used to say in Urdu, he used to say, this is a mas'ala which is nazik, I don't know, this is a very hassas, like how do I translate this? It's a very sensitive issue. It's very sensitive. This is Allah's beloved. This is the one about whom Allah said in the Quran, لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي. Don't raise your voices above his voice. Don't raise your voices. Don't call him by his name. Don't call him by his name. Don't say Ya Muhammad. Don't call him by his name. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Say Ya Rasulullah, Ya Nabi Allah. That's what you call him. Call him by his honorific titles. Don't call him by his name. So, our Prophet means everything to us. I've always mentioned this. May Allah give us tawfiq to say this till our end breath. For us, everything begins with him, everything ends with him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Everything begins with him, everything ends with him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is everything for us. He is everything for us. Our lives are for him. Sayyidi Ala Hazrat rahimahullah ta'ala, he used to say, there's a line of his poetry, Hum aaye yahan tumhare liye, hum uthaye wahan tumhare liye. He said, we came here because of you, and we'll be raised in the day of judgment because of you. Because Allah created the perfect slave. He's the perfect slave. He's his beloved, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sallam. So, it's very hassas. We have to be very careful when it comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say these things. In any case, so he, following the sunnah of many great ones, including of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he would go and spend time in seclusion. And so he spends 25 years radiallahu anhu around Baghdad in the wilderness, focusing on himself, focusing on his own zuhud. And he says in these 25 years that he engrossed himself in intense spiritual exercises. Subhanallah. It's interesting also that there are famous, when we're talking about suppressing the nafs, there are famous terms that are used in tasawwuf of nafsul ammara bisu, nafsul lawama, and nafs mutma'inna. But this is like the different stages of the nafs. Imam al-Qushayri lists more than that. I think he goes into 5, but Qushayri is much later. So I wonder if Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani, this would be a good research topic for anybody interested, that this idea, this categorization of the nafs, al-lawam, of course, it comes from the Quran. Al-ammara bisu, Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam mentions this in Surah Yusuf. You can look it up. The words nafs, al-ammara, all of these are in the Quran, by the way. But it became like a categorization of a nafs. That's first, it's just an ammara bisu. This nafs, all it does is just call to evil. But then through spiritual exercises, it becomes a lawama, where it's kind of like it may fall and slip, but it feels guilty and it comes back. It may fall and slip, but it makes tawbah, feels guilty and it comes back. Until it becomes a nafs mutma'inna. Ya ayyatuha nafsul mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbik. So this becomes like Allah mentions Surah Fajr in Juz Amma. You know, that the nafs mutma'inna has itminan, it's a satisfied, content soul. Radiya with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Mardiya. It's also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with it. There's also a story that in his days of seclusion that he once met Sayyidina Khidr. Now Sayyidina Khidr is an important figure in our history. Generally speaking, he is considered to be a saint and not a prophet. The scholars differed about whether he still lives or whether he died. With great imams on either side, and great imams that said that he is still alive, and great imams that said that he is not alive. But generally, in the kind of more spiritual or mystical tradition, Al-Khidr is featured very often. And Sayyid Abdul-Qadir Jeelani himself mentions about Khidr, that he met Khidr when he was in his seclusion, and Khidr said to him, "Sit in this spot." So he said, and he didn't tell him who he was. So he said, "I sat there," and he came back a year later. I didn't leave from that area. I remained there. And he came back and he said, "Okay, stay here." He gave him, I think he gave him some, he brought him some milk and some bread. And he came back again. Until finally when he came back after a number of years, he said to Imam Khidr, he told him who he was. This was indicating to another station of the seclusion and the mujahada of Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani, of istislam. Now, this is not to be taken, I mean, we have, Islam means submission. In the Sufi tradition, there's a heavy focus on submission, to submit to one's Shaykh. However, this can only be the case, there are conditions. Maulana Ahmad Rida Khan gives a litany of conditions for that Shaykh. Because firstly, he has to be a Shaykh. He cannot be anybody. And we can see what happens around the world. All the time we have a tradition of charlatans, of people that people will just blindly follow them and they will lead them into all kinds of misguidance, all kinds of strange activities which are contrary to the Sharia. And this is why our ulama mentioned that the way that you know the Shaykh is the Shaykh is that al-istiqama fawqa al-karama. You want to see the greatest miracle of a Shaykh. I mean, Imam al-Junayd mentioned, don't tell me that so-and-so's flying in the air, that's a miracle. Even a fly can fly, he says. What miracle is it that a bird can fly, a fly can fly? That's not a miracle. You want to tell me that so-and-so's a saint? You tell me that they have istiqamah. They are firm, without faltering on the sacred law of the Prophet ﷺ. That's a wali. That's a saint. Imam Qadi Iyad, rahimahullah al-Shifa, he says, you love the Prophet ﷺ? You claim love for the Prophet? He says, awwalu alamatin, the first sign of hub or muhabba, he says, is ittiba', obedience. And this is why they used to say, it's a proverb, al-muhib lil-mahbubi muti', that a lover is obedient to his beloved. Obedience is a sign, a number one sign of love, that you obey. So somebody that claims that they love the Prophet ﷺ, but they don't obey him, this is not love. This is fake. This is something else. And so if he followed, is because he understood that this was someone important, or that he knew it was Qadr, and so he was obeying him and highlighting the story to us that when the great ones, and why did the Shaykh used to do this, by the way? They would test their followers and their murids. Well, why would they? Just to see whether they were going to listen or not. It's to train them in obedience. Sometimes people say that, like, oh, why does a Shaykh test and trial his aspirants, his murideen, his followers? It's to train them, if he's a proper Shaykh, that is. It's to train them in obedience so that they can obey the Prophet, so that they can obey Allah. This is what it was. If you look, what's our tradition? Our tradition is the tradition of sami'na wa ata'na. Ahbab, hakada. Sami'na wa ata'na. We heard and we obeyed. Nothing else. Allah said it. قال Allah wa qala Rasul. Sami'na wa ata'na. That's what the Sahaba were like. The Sahaba never questioned. They never questioned the Prophet ﷺ. If he said it, he said it. Look, why is Abu Bakr called as-Siddiq, the truthful? Because when the Prophet ﷺ said that he went on the Mi'raj from Mecca to Jerusalem, the Quraysh came to Sayyidina Abu Bakr and they said to him, do you know what your sahib is saying? Subhanallah. Even the kuffar of Quraysh recognized Abu Bakr as a sahabi of the Prophet ﷺ. And we have people that say that they are Muslim, that they deny that Abu Bakr is a companion of the Prophet ﷺ. Sorry, that's a tangent and ishara for some that may understand that discussion. And people that may attack the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. The kuffar of Quraysh recognize that he is a companion of the Prophet ﷺ. Allah says, يَقُولِ صَاحِبِهِ. In the Quran, he said to his companion, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, and they said, you know what he is saying? He is saying that he went from Mecca to Jerusalem late in a small portion of the night. He says, if he says it, I believe it. I believe that he brings revelation from the heavens. What are you talking about, going from Mecca to Jerusalem? I believe angels come from the heavens and they bring him revelation. Meaning I believe anything that he says. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. So this is Islam. It's that ability to just submit, which again we learn from the life of Sayyidina Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani. I'll try to wrap up. Oh, this is interesting. So he has, subhanallah, he has at least 4 encounters with shaitan in his life, with the devil, like actual encounters. Each one signifies something different. So we can take immense lessons from these, but I'll try to get through them quickly. His first encounter with shaitan is that shaitan comes to him and he says that you've exhausted my students and myself. We've tried to mislead you, but we can't. When he hears this, Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani says to him, get lost, you cursed one. I seek refuge in Allah from you. A'udhu billah. And he said that he saw a hand from the unseen appear and to push shaitan away. Now the khulasa, the lub of this is that sometimes shaitan comes to you and me and he makes us feel big about ourselves. You've exhausted shaitan. Shaitan ain't got nothing on me. Shaitan can't touch this. He makes you feel like you're big. And it's in this that he's going to make you trip. Whereas what does Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani say? He says, get lost to him. Get lost, cursed one. Meaning he doesn't fall into that trap of believing him and thinking that he is big. A second time, a shaitan comes to him with a ball of fire and he throws it at him. And Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani said, I saw a veiled person on a white horse appear and he gave me a sword in my hand. When I took the sword, the shaitan began to run. Again, from this, we learn that sometimes shaitan will make us feel scared. Allah tells us, shaitan will scare you with poverty. You can't do that. If you do that, how are you going to eat? How are you going to do X, Y, Z? Shaitan will scare us. If you don't do this, you're going to be poor. You're going to waste this. You're going to waste. Shaitan comes to us and he uses fear against us. Sometimes he makes us feel big. Sometimes he uses fear. Another encounter with shaitan is that one time shaitan came to him and he was sitting on the ground and he was putting sand on his head. When he saw me, he said, oh, Abdul-Qaadir, you have made me very sad and disillusioned. I said, oh, cursed one, go away. I seek protection in Allah from you. He says, these words, when he heard this, Shaitan said, these words of yours have hurt me even more. And then he surrounded me with traps. And he said that these are the traps of the dunya that I will keep on attempting to mislead you. The point is, from this, is that sometimes he may even make you feel sorry for him. He may even make you feel sorry for him. How many times, for example, and by the way, these are human sensitivities. I'm not in any way denying anyone's humanness. We are all human, we all slip, we all fall, we are human beings. Lakin, take for example, I say to, I have a 13-year-old son, and I say, look, you're at least 3 years past the date where you should have been praying. You need to pray Salah. And now I want to get him up for Fajr. Or I want to get him to pray his Salah during the day. And people start saying, he's a bacha, yaar. He's just a child. He's just a kid. Let him be. Look, I start to feel sorry for him. Shaitan is making me feel sorry for him. Whereas in reality, if he does not have the habit of praying and he does not pray on the day of judgment, what a shame. That's where you should feel sorry, because now on the day of judgment, he's going to go and have trouble. I'm going to go and I'm going to be in trouble. So he will come and he'll make you feel sorry for so-and-so, make you feel sorry for them. So sometimes this could come in that way, but it's just shaitan and he's tricking us. The principle is to protect your iman, always. Protect your iman and do not let shaitan come to you, not through fear, not through making you feel big about yourself, and not through scaring you, and not through making you feel pity and sorry. These are all different ways that shaitan can approach you. The last one, which is the most famous, perhaps many people have not heard these ones before, but this one they would have certainly heard about, is where shaitan comes to him and he says to him, Abdul-Qaadir, I have made everything halal for you. Meaning he was saying that he is Allah. Ma'adullah, hasha, la'natullah ala shaitan, wa ala junudihi. Wa na'udhu billah minhum. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. And shaitan, and Sayyidina Abdul-Qadir Jeelani says the same thing to shaitan. Get lost. I seek Allah's refuge in you. And as he is leaving, he says, oh, Abdul-Qadir, your knowledge saved you. That you had knowledge to know that I was shaitan and that I would not have made, that Allah would not make everything halal for you. That you don't have to pray, you can do whatever you want. And as he is leaving, Abdul-Qadir says, I seek refuge in you, refuge in Allah from you a second time. Because it's not my knowledge that saved me, but it's the mercy of my Lord. But it's the mercy of my Lord. So as he was leaving, he was trying to trick him a second time. And this is by creating takabbur. This is contentment with oneself. To not suspect oneself, to always suspect others, but to not suspect oneself, to feel okay with where one is. This is not the state of the believer. The state of the believer is not to feel, we have a tendency, we all do. Again, I put myself in the same boat. That we, especially modern Muslims, generally in the West, we're always trying to square everything with how we feel. I just, I can't do this, it's in my bones. And we use this kind of language of how everything is so. Imagine if the Sahaba talk like that. There'd be no Islam today. Imagine if the Sahaba talk like that. Anything when it comes to any ruling of Islam that we find difficult. But it's just so, of course it's hard. That's part of the test. We're all going to slip and we all have to get up. We're all in this together. But it is what we have to achieve, or attempt to achieve at least. We can't try to change the religion to make ourselves feel better. It's not how it works. So, Sidi Abdul Qadir was never content with where he was. Oh, this is very interesting. So the spiritual chain of Sidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani, this is barakah here. This is barakah. And many people watching no doubt will have, their spiritual chain will join to the spiritual chain. Their chain of knowledge and of, what I mean by a spiritual chain is that they may have made tawbah at the hands of a teacher, Okay, yeah, I'll get to that. Jazakallah khair. So many people would have put their hands in the hand. You know, like we have the hadith of Musafa, like of shaking the hands. If you remember Karima with Sheikh Salih bin Wickham, we did that with Sheikh Tariq Sardar quite a few years ago, where we went, no, with Sheikh Mullah al-Ahsa'i from Saudi Arabia, when he came and we, you know, he gave us the hadith where we shook his hand, and he had shaken the hand of someone who had shaken the hand of someone who had shaken the hand, all the way back to the companion who shook the hand of the Prophet ﷺ. And so we have that. Many of our teachers will tie a turban on our heads, and their teacher tied their turban, and their teacher tied their turban, all the way back to the Rasul ﷺ. So likewise, we make tawbah at the hands. We take an ahad, an oath, that we will try to follow the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, and we will try our best to follow the guidance of our Shaykh and our teacher, and our lineage will go back up to Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jeelani in this way. But from Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jeelani, he was the disciple of Shaykh Abu Sa'id al-Mukharrami, and he was the disciple of Shaykh Abu Hassan Ali bin Muhammad al-Qurayshi, and he was a disciple of Shaykh Abu al-Farah al-Tartusi, and he was a disciple of Shaykh Abu al-Fadl Abdul Wahid al-Tamimi, and he was a disciple of Shaykh Abu Bakr Abdullah Shibli, and he was a disciple of Sayyid al-Ta'ifatain Imam al-Junayd, Shaykh al-Junayd al-Baghdadi, and he was a disciple of Shaykh Abul Hassan Sariya Saqati, and he was, and these names are huge in our tradition, radiyallahu anhum, and he was a disciple of Shaykh Ma'ruf al-Qarhi, and he was a student of Shaykh Dawood Ta'i, and he was a student of Shaykh Habib al-Ajami. He was a disciple of Shaykh Hassan al-Basri, Khwaja Hassan al-Basri, and he was the disciple and student of Imam al-Awwaleen wal-Akhirin, Imam Ali bin Abi Talib, who was the cousin and son-in-law of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, who was of course the disciple, the companion, the beloved of Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ. This is how you know your spirituality is correct, because it's that lineage, it's that unbroken chain back to the Holy Prophet ﷺ in our outward sciences and in our inward sciences. When he, after his 25 years of being out, when he returns to Baghdad, he sees a man who's old and frail. And so he asks him, he talks to him, and the man says, I am the religion of your grandfather. I became diseased and miserable, but God has revived me through your help. So this event foreshadowed the future career, i.e. the future efforts of Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jeelani. Now this is now when Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jeelani, now let me just summarize this as I come to an end. Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jeelani is his tarbiyah from his parents whom we talked about. His education is at Jamia Nizamiya in its heyday. So his education in the outward sciences is very strong. He is a disciple of two very, very prominent spiritual masters. He then, after his outward education, spends 25 years under the tutelage of his Shaykh and of Al-Khadijah, and in extreme zuhud and working on himself. When he comes back into Baghdad, he becomes in our, I love the subcontinental tradition because we're very expressive, Pakistanis and Indians, we're very expressive people. We have amazing ways of expressing ourselves. So when he comes back in, they describe him as Shah Baghdad, and I love that. Shah Baghdad, he's the king of Baghdad as he returns, radiyallahu anhu warda. I wish if English was, the English is expressive, but it's just not English to do it. So the Pakistani in me is always, when I'm doing an English lecture, it's always buzzing around inside me, and I'm trying to control it and subdue it. I just want to let it out and break out into some Urdu poetry, but I may lose the audience. So he was over 50 years, by the way, when he returned back to Baghdad, and this is in the year 521 after Hijri, which is 1127 kind of common era. So this is now where he begins to publicly speak. So his Shaykh says to him, and he takes the post of his Shaykh. His Shaykh had held that post for over 30 years. What was this post? This is This is it. Because we have a lot of people that will say that Sufism has nothing to do with law. It has nothing to do with Sharia. It has nothing to do with following the tenets of Islam. But it's something different. When he comes back, the post that he takes after 25 years of living in the wilderness is that he becomes a successor as the principal of the Hanbali school of law. Think about that. In Madrasa Babul Ajaz. So he becomes the leading Hanbali faqih. And he's an Imam in the Hanbali school. He's considered from one of the great Imams of the Hanbali school. He's got a voluminous work in which he speaks about outward and inward, both a bit like the Ihya Ulumuddin of Imam al-Ghazali, where it has outward subjects as well as inward subjects. Now he's called, when he comes back, this is just wonderful. When he comes back, naturally, unfortunately, but naturally, lots of people don't like it. Who are those people? The ulama. We know that when Imam Mahdi is going to come back, and Imam Mahdi will come back, because the ahadith of Imam Mahdi coming back are mutawatira, and we believe in that concept of mutawatir. So he will come back. We believe in our tradition. We're not selling our tradition. We believe in that tradition. When Imam Mahdi comes back, the first people, Ibn Arabi mentions, the first people that are going to fight him will be the fuqaha, will be the scholars. Because they're not going to understand this man. See, because ulama us-su, scholars of evilness, meaning people, scholars that are not refined or not sincere, they do not like the attention of people to go anywhere else. Because all of their efforts are to gain people's attention. They don't want to leave. They want everyone's attention towards themselves. But naturally, when great imams come into an area, they come in to rectify, because Baghdad was filled with ulama as-su. Imam al-Ghazali complains about the same thing. This is what I mentioned at the beginning. This was interesting, because in this time Imam al-Ghazali complains about the same thing. In fact, he writes his Ihya Ulumuddin for this reason. 20 books in that Ihya Ulumuddin. He says, because and the first people in Babul Ilm, the first chapter, the first book, he takes the scholars to account. And this is why there were scholars later on, they used to burn the Ihya Ulumuddin. They didn't disagree with him theologically. They went off a different sect, but they feared that if people read his book, that they would realize that these people are flawed and fake. Being flawed is okay, because that's being human, but being fake, this is something different. And so that they didn't want to be exposed. So when he comes back to Baghdad, the ulama don't like him. So what do they do to send him a message? And anyone that's, like, if you read into our history, this has happened. This happened to the Ba'alawi Sada when they went to Tarim in Hadramaut. A lot of people did not like it. This happens with Ahlul Bayt. The family of the Prophet have always been persecuted. Have always been persecuted because people love Ahlul Bayt. We love Ahlul Bayt. Ahlul Bayt are the crowns on our heads. Ahlul Bayt mean everything to us. The family of the Prophet, his flesh and blood. We love them for that nisbah that they have, that link that they have to the Prophet. What an honor Allah Ta'ala gave them. So they sent him a bucket filled with water to the top, with no room. And so, okay, I'll get to that question. So they sent him this bucket of water, indicating to him that Baghdad is filled. There ain't no more room for any more water. You're not welcome here. That's the ishara. So what does Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani do? Firstly, he's beautiful. So he doesn't know how to retaliate with anger, even though he was a very stern person. But he needs to show them what he is and what his maqam is and what he has been told is his maqam. So he puts a rose on top of the water and he sends it back to indicate that it may be filled with Baghdad, but now there's a rose that is going to sit on top of all of that, and it's going to beautify that water. It's going to give scent and color to that water. Allahu Akbar. And when they see this, they realize who Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani is, and for this reason he's called the Rose of Baghdad. It's called the Rose of Baghdad. Radiallahu anhu warda. May Allah raise us with Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani and our Prophet on the Day of Judgment. Allahumma ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. So he used to give lectures. The Gyarvi that you talked about is going to come into this. But he used to give, so during the month of Shawwal, 521, he sees a dream of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, who tells him that he needs to begin to preach and to teach. So with idhn of the Prophet, and you'll notice this as well, whenever the great awliya began to give da'wah, they used to stay away. They didn't used to come into a community until they got idhn from the Prophet ﷺ. That's very important. Idhn is very important. If he gives you idhn, then they will go into a community and you will see that community change, transform. But until that idhn has not come, there will be no transformation of that community through that person. And so, I mean, we call Sayyidi Mu'inuddin Chishti, Ajmeri, Sanjari, Rahimahullah Ta'ala, is called Ata'i Hind. Ata'i Hind. He was gifted to India, to Hind, because he was in Medina Munawwara and he sees the Prophet ﷺ in a dream who tells him that he needs to go to India and start preaching. And he cries because he doesn't want to leave Medina Munawwara. And then he says to the Prophet, how am I going to know how to speak the language? And the Prophet said, by the time you'll get there, you'll know the language. So he leaves. He actually stops by and meets Sayyidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani. By the way, Shaykh Mu'inuddin Chishti in India, from whom Chishtis come, he meets Abdul Qadir Jeelani. And also he stays at the maqam of Ali al-Hajwari, what's called Data Darbar in Lahore. And he has a famous couplet that if you go to Lahore, to Data Darbar, it's written on top of there about the maqam of Ali al-Hajwari, who has a very famous book. Again, these books all translated into English. Kashf al-Mahjub of Ali al-Hajwari, very early scholar. The likes of Risala al-Qushayriya, most of the books of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani are translated into English, etc. When he goes to Ajmer, by the way, he's on top of a mountain and he used to worship there by himself in seclusion. And he was there, reports mention, the day that Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani famously said that my foot is on the necks of all of the awliya. Meaning that this is his maqam that Allah gave him as Sayyid al-Awliya. There's karamatan, as a miracle, there's a report that Shaykh Mu'inuddin Chishti heard this when he was in India. And he said, Bal ala ra'as wal ayn, or Bal ala al-ayn wal ra'as. However he said it. He said, rather, meaning on my neck, but on my head and on my eyes, he said. Because we have this in the Arab tradition. If somebody was to say to me, can you do this for me? I'd say, ala ra'as wal ayn, on my head and on my eyes. Meaning that your command is on my head and on my eyes. So he would give these lectures. He then said to the Prophet ﷺ to make dua for him that he is granted with eloquence in tongue. And they say that the Prophet ﷺ, he recited the verse in the Quran, Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikma wal maw'idati al hasana wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan. He recited this 7 times and he blew on his face. And so he developed extreme eloquence when he was giving bayans. So the same day after Dhuhr prayer, he mounted the pulpit and he began to give a sermon. Now what used to happen is not only did he transform Baghdad, this is why also he's called Muhyiddin, the reviver of the religion, is because he transformed Baghdad. His gatherings, I'll get into a little bit about his gatherings. He used to deliver 3 lectures a week, Wednesday evenings, Fridays, and Sunday mornings. He did this for 40 years, from 521 Hijri to 561 Hijri. So he first begins teaching people in the madrasa, but it wasn't big enough. So they moved into the courtyard. It's like if you look at, sometimes Allah gives qabuliyat to people. You know, I lived in Tarim as a student, and if you look at early videos, for example, of Habib Umar in Dar al-Mustafa, if you look at the early videos of the Yeah. How long? Can I just ask one of the brothers? How long have I been going for, and how long do I should have been wrapping up a little while ago, but it's just I'm really enjoying speaking about Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani. If you could just message me even and just let me know how long I've got. So he subhanallah, Habib Umar, if you look at the early videos on YouTube of his mawlids, the Thursday night mawlids, there's only a few rows at the beginning. Then the whole, and it's a big hall, the Musalla of Ahl Kasab, it's huge. The whole hall became full. I haven't got a message yet. If anybody could just message me, let me know how long I've been going for. And so the whole room was full, the whole mosque hall. Then the courtyard. When I was there, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, not just the outside, not just the outside of the mosque, into the courtyard area, everything would be filled on the Thursday night. Don't let, mashallah. All of it was filled. You know, when he gives his Wednesday, his daily Rawha, which is after Asr, he gives a dars where people read, a number of books to him. Another text, the students and some of the teachers, they read text to him. When that happened, everything in the area closes. All the shops around Dar Mustafa close when he gives that dars. That's the impact of his dars. And we have great ones among us all over. They do exist, and you can see their impact. So when Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani, Allahu Akbar, okay, when Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani, then they moved into an Eidgah, an area that was designated for Eid, an open area. The open area, and 70,000 people used to attend his classes. 70,000 people, reported history. And not just that, but from the miracles of Sayyidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani is that he had no microphones, but the people at the back used to hear him just as the people at the front. So I'm gonna try to wrap up here. Yeah, I'm gonna leave off some stuff that I had prepared here. Let me just quickly mention his family members, and I'm finished. And I'll take your questions. He has a very large family. He never got married. He did not want to get married. He was so focused on his ibadah and his teaching and his preaching that he did not want to get married. But he has a dream of the Holy Prophet ﷺ that tells him that he should act upon the sunnah of getting married. The Prophet ﷺ said, "An-nikahu min sunnati." Nikah, getting married, is from my sunnah. He gets married late in his life, but he takes 4 wives. One of his wives' name is Sayyida Madina, mashallah. Sayyida Sadiqa, mashallah. Beautiful names. Sayyida Mu'mina and Sayyida Mahbuba. Beautiful names. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants him with 49 children. And this is why today we have a lot of Sayyids that share lineage with Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani. And sometimes people say, how can so many people have a lineage with Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani? It's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him with 49 children, 27 sons and 22 daughters, many of whom became famous sheikhs. The famous sheikhs from his sons were Sheikh Saifuddin Abdul Wahhab. There's many others. I'm just going to mention Sheikh Saifuddin was probably the most popular, but there are many others. And if anybody wants information, I can send it to Karima and they can put it up on the website. So when he was, and I'll finish on this, when he was in his final moments, when he was really unwell, his son, Sheikh Abdul Wahhab, he asked him for some advice. Give me some parting advice. And the Shaykh gave him this parting advice. He said, fear Allah Almighty, fear none but Allah. Always turn towards Him. Ask all your wishes from Allah. Do not turn to any besides Allah. Do not have faith in any but in Allah. Remain firm on Tawheed, believing in one God. There is no salvation without believing in one God. When the heart becomes linked with Allah, then nothing else seems to look good to Him. I have reached the level of true love. It is a domain where worldly love has no place. And that was, and then when he passed away, he said these words as his soul was leaving his body. He said, First he said to his sons, he said, all my organs are hurting today except my heart. There is no pain there, for it is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he said, there is none worthy of worship but Allah, glorified and exalted is He, the ever-living, who has no fear of passing away. Glory be to Him, who exalts in His omnipotence and subdues His servants with death. There is none worthy of worship but Allah, and Muhammad is Allah's messenger. He passed away in the year 561, Hijri 1166, Common Era, at the age of 91 and 92 according to another report. He had a huge janazah and he's buried till this day. His mausoleum is buried in Baghdad Sharif. Some of his main works include Futuh al-Ghaib, translated into English, Revelations of the Unseen, Al-Fath al-Rabbani, the Sublime Revelation, translated into English, Jala al-Khawatir, the Removal of Cares, Kitab Sir al-Asrar, the Malfuzat, Al-Ghunya li Talib Tariq al-Haq, and he has a number of other works, Khamsata Ashara Maktuban, etc. So he has many works, Bashair al-Khairat, etc. And he has a book on Salawat, or two books on Salawat, of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. Okay, I have a list of his quotes as well. His I was going to read some of them to you, but I think I'm going to leave it there because I've been going for about 1 hour and 20 minutes, and that is very long. And I've noticed that you've kept with me for that entire time. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you. So let me just go through some questions. Let me go from the top down. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Okay. Oh, okay. So I answered the Imam al-Hasan al-Askari one. Allah bless you. I wonder why the bloodline only extends to Sayyidina Fatima and not other daughters. Because Sayyidina Osama did not have any children. So Sayyidina Osama, who's the daughter of Sayyidina Zainab, she did not have any of the children. So Sayyidina Fatima is the only one who actually had any children. So that is answering 01, Zamzam 01. What place does the monthly Garvi? So cooking food, this was just something that he used to do. In this idea that on the 11th of every month that he used to have, a big, and this, he used to do it the way, you would have like, a monthly gathering or something, just to make it easy. Everyone knows on the first Monday of every month, we do this. Because at that time, it wasn't like now even, you could just put a message out on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever, or WhatsApp, one of these kind of broadcast lists that we have, and that's it, job's done. But at that time, you couldn't do that. We're talking about the 5th century here, right? So he just used to designate a day to have that big gathering. And they used to feed the poor in that gathering. It actually used to be a dars of Quran, by the way. Now, the gatherings that you have today, do they serve the same purpose? Some of them, like in Pakistan, India, where the poor get fed, and there's proper learning going on. Yeah, that's a good practice. Now, does it need to be on the 11th? No, of course it doesn't. To fix it and to say that you must do it on that day, of course, this is not something that is good. But if somebody just said, oh, he used to do it, so, it's like, for example, if, you take, I don't know, an author of a fiqh text, and I just write it in the same style as all of the Imams in the Shafi'i school. How they wrote books in the Shafi'i school, I write a book in the Shafi'i school, for example, not that I could, or for the purpose of argument. If I just did that and somebody said, why would you write it in the same style as those before you? It's just because I love them. I'm not saying you have to. It's just out of love. We're just imitating what he did. This gives us an opportunity to teach people about him, his legacy, which is the legacy of Islam, and to feed people. If these things are being fulfilled, it's a good thing. But of course, to say that you have to, and likewise the opposite, people that kind of, they don't really fully understand, they kind of just go in guns blazing and just call everything a bid'ah, that's not helpful either, Of course, some people don't practice things right, but lots of people don't make Umrah correctly either, or make Hajj. You don't suddenly just, not I'm making a comparison between the two, but I'm just saying that on both sides, people need to just relax a little bit, find out what it is. Most people don't do Garvi, it's not a big deal, but in the subcontinent, it's like part of the culture that they do that. It's like a fixed date that everyone knows that on this day we're gonna have a class. There's no haraj in that, as long as people don't believe that it is that it is some kind of obligation, which I've not met anyone that has believed that. Perhaps somebody's retaliating, they may say some things that are, unwarranted, but otherwise it's just, so people do it out of love for Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani, really, and just so that they can join in something that he did. I don't think that there's any haraj in that. Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani was a Hanbali. Was there a compromise between Sharia and Sufism that we see these days? Of course, there's always been that compromise. There's always been that compromise. You've always had Sufis since the beginning. I mean, you have Sufis. Well, let me just say, like, they may not have been called Sufis, but you have esoteric groups that existed in the Abbasid period in Baghdad in the 2nd century. You had that. So you've had those sorts of people, and they believed since the kind of early days. We talk about Hassan al-Askari. From some people in his time, you had the Alawis, kind of they consider themselves to an esoteric, sort of a cult that believed in the incarnation of God, etc. So yeah, of course, you've always had groups that have believed that. Today is no different. And this is why, great Imams like Imam al-Ghazali, they called out those kind of Sufis. How would the Hanbalism of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani differ from Wahhabism of today? Now that is an excellent question for Sheikh Saleh. Like, that's just like the perfect question for Sheikh Saleh, because he's obviously, I can see Hisham laughing there. It's true, isn't it? I'm not making that up. It's perfect for him because, one, he is studying the Hanbali school extensively, so he would be perfect. In a nutshell, however, I think it depends on which type of Salafis or Wahhabis are you talking. I mean, I'm not saying that they're both the same. I'm not trying to be derogatory in any way. I'm just saying that, let's say Salafis. Let's take the term Wahhabis out because that can be seen as derogatory. But Salafi is a respectable and acceptable title. The Salafi of today, the traditional Hanbali, there is a difference. Truth be told, there is a difference. The main difference is that the Hanbalis of past used to stick to their madhab. They were confined to that madhab. They did not attempt to go back to the Quran and Sunnah themselves. So if you have a Salafi today that says, look, I'm the same. I follow the Hanbali school. I don't have the requirements, the prerequisites to go back to the Quran and Sunnah myself, and I don't, then maybe there's not. But if I'm going to teach a Hanbali text, I'm going to say, نعم قال المؤلف رحمه الله كذا لكن أقول أنا. The Mu'allif says this, but I say this. And I've seen this being done. The author says this, but I say this. The author says this, but I say this. And you're just disagreeing with the author. And also, Hanbali, I did a video on this once, but it got lost somewhere. And I haven't been able to find it. But I listed, I think, about 13 points from the Mughni of Ibn Qudama al-Hanbali, one of the great, he's the first Hanbali to write Hanbali Usul in his Rawdat al-Nadira, where his points of creed are 100% against the creed of many Salafis today. So he's pro tawassul, which I'm going to get to in a minute, intermediaries. He's pro, giving reward to the dead. He's pro the deceased having a relationship to those that are alive. This is it's an important Hanbali work. I don't think it's considered one of the fatwa works in the Hanbali school. Sheikh Saleh will know more about that, but it is considered an important work in the Hanbali school, nevertheless. And so maybe not just in fiqh, but maybe in creed, that the Hanbalis from before, many of them, especially in the later period, all became Ash'ari pretty much. Not all of them, but many of them became Ash'ari, were at least influenced by the Ash'aris. So there may be differences between the creed of Hanbalis and non-Salafis as well. I mean, I would argue that there is in many ways, but again, I think Sheikh Saleh did do a lecture on that, but it's a good question for him. Jazakumullahu khairan, Ahl al-Bayt, ala ra's wal ayn. Is it permitted to use Ghaus al-Azam? Absolutely. What does it mean to call him Ghaus al-Azam? Ghaus means a helper. If you believe in tawassul, then there's no harm in it. If you don't believe in tawassul, then there's a big harm in it. But if you believe in tawassul, the idea that I'm asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the sake of this person. If I can say, Ya Allah, for the sake, for example, if I say, Ya Allah, for the sake of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, give me this. And that we believe that those prayers are, that this is helpful in our plea. That we believe that this is helpful, then this is my ghaus. I'm saying, yeah, you're my ghaus because you're my helper, because I take you to Allah and I say, Ya Allah, for the sake of this person. So if you believe in tawassul, the idea of intermediary to begin with, then calling that person a ghaus it's like a metaphor. Nobody is a ghaus other than Allah in reality. Nobody can do anything for you except Allah. Allah created every prophet, every saint. Every atom and accident within existence is Allah. Everything. Nothing can happen without His will. Everything, every prophet, every saint depends on Allah, worships Allah, is in need of Allah. All of anything other than Allah is Allah's creation. That's it. So, the same way that if I messaged one of the brothers and I said, you know what, man, you've been a great help. Why? Because whenever I'm needed to go and sort this out in the office, I just say, look, I'm friends with so-and-so, and they always do what I need. Whatever I need, they just do it much quicker. If I called you, you didn't really physically do anything for me, but I benefited. I benefited from you. So I call you my helper. So calling anybody a ghawth like that is not a problem. Ghawth al-a'zam means that from the awliya, that you're an intermediary that we consider to be the best, the greatest. So some people say, isn't Allah the greatest help? Why are you comparing the two? Understand the mas'ala how it is. Understand it how it is. If somebody, astaghfirullah, was likening the creation to Allah, this is a problem. This is a big problem. But if somebody is, I'm not saying that. If I said to you, you know what, you have been my greatest support. Imagine, in my life, I look at you and I just say, you know what, man, you've been my greatest support. And so I says, astaghfirullah, Allah is the greatest support. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? We're talking at this level. We're not talking at that level. And we're talking between ourselves. So when we say Ghaus Azam or Al-Ghawth Al-A'zam, we mean that you're our great intermediary to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the awliya. From the awliya, you're the greatest. Not from the anbiya or the sahaba, from the awliya. This is just a term that people coined to show their love and for their reverence for Sayyidi Abdul-Qaadir Jeelani. Where's the likening people to Allah in this? Where is that? It really, if somebody thinks, they properly sit down and think, then realize that, look, this is not, it doesn't make sense in your mind. Allah give us tawfiq. Do all the tariqah stuff from Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani? No. Or from Imam al-Baghdadi? No. They are two big Imams. Every tariqah somehow has some benefit from Abdul Qadir Jeelani though. Take the Ba'alawi tariqah. In Yemen, the Ba'alawi tariqah, they don't go through either Imam al-Junayd or Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jeelani. However, one of the great Imams in the Ba'alawi tariqah is al-Faqih al-Muqaddam, al-Ustad al-A'zam. So it's like now, if somebody was to say, oh, you just called him Ustad al-A'zam, isn't the Prophet the greatest teacher? What are you talking? Do you know how people use language? Do you use your common sense? We're talking about in this tariqah, from the Imams of the Ba'alawis, he's considered Ustad al-A'zam. Why are you linking this to prophets or to companions or to other people? Understand how we use language. Use your common sense with it. But Faqih al-Muqaddam, Ustad al-A'zam, radiyallahu anhu, that he was, Sayyidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani sent his khirqa, his cloak, which is usually a sign of him, him gifting you something. So it was like a blessing to receive his cloak. And so he sent his khirqa to Faqih al-Muqaddam in Hadramaut and Tareeb. So there's always this kind of, even the Shadhalis, there's always something of Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jeelani that appears. But they don't all go through him, of course. Can we have another? Okay, YouTube. How many was there comparison between Sharia and Sufism? I think I've got that down. First time I've seen this page. Thumbs up. Okay. Who are the holders of the Qadri tradition today? Whoa, son of Adam. Whoa, son of Adam. I don't know. Who are the holders of the Qadri tariqah today? Allahu Akbar. I don't know. Who are the holders? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, if you know, message me, son of Adam. I don't know who that's. That would require some spiritual station to be able to see things like that. Allah yabarik fikum. Is it true Shaykh Ibn Arabi was a student of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani? They're not a student. There's a report that they call him his spiritual son. That Ibn Arabi is the spiritual son of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani. That they say that his father, Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani's father, visited Ibn Arabi. And that Ibn Arabi said to him he said to him that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gifted one of my sons to you. One of my sons, Allah has gifted him to you. And that was Shaykh al-Akbar ibn Arabi, rahimahullah ta'ala. So, in this way, this is all, again, it's metaphor. This is metaphor. This is spiritual language. So again, see, it's crazy because wherever you're going to go in the spiritual tradition of Islam, Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jeelani is there. It's amazing. It's mind-blowing about just how important he is. And we don't even know how important he is, really. We just know some historic facts. Really, we don't know how important these people are in the tradition of Islam. Who is the Sheikh? Who is the Sheikh Saleh? Sheikh Saleh al-Fawzan. Hafidhahullah. No, this is Sheikh Saleh, Hafidhahullah al-Haywikami. It's from Haywickham. And he's mashallah, he's doing very well in his studies and research on Hanbali fiqh. And I think he teaches Hanbali fiqh as well online. But if you just message Karima, they can sort something out for you. Okay, inshallah, barakallahu feekum. I think that's it for all of the questions. We've been going for a very long time. Allah bless you all. I'm so grateful. I don't know if you felt this, but I've been I was very tired before this talk. And it's just talking about Sayyidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani has just brought me to life. I was so happy to do this. I feel so honored to have had this opportunity to have talked about Sayyidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani. I feel shy and embarrassed that I can never do him justice. But I pray that this is maqbool, that this is accepted in Allah's court. And I pray that Allah raises all of us with Sayyidi Abdul Qadir Jeelani and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt and the Sahaba, Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Uthman, Sayyidina Ali, our heroes, our lights, our gems, and our Holy Prophet ﷺ on the Day of Judgment. Allahumma ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He accepts this from Karima al-Marzawiyya, that this becomes a great source of blessing for them, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses the Ummah of the chosen one, alayhi salatu wasalam. Allah protects the Ummah, Allah gives tawfiq to the Ummah, Allah allows us to rise up to the challenges of our age. Allah fill our hearts with the nur of Islam, with His love and the love for His Habib, His beloved Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. Allah give us a proper fahm, Allah give us an understanding of the Sharia, and Allah make our tariqah within that Sharia. Allahumma ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Allah not let us go astray, ya Rabbal Alameen. Protect our iman, the iman of our children and their children until we meet you on the Day of Judgment. Allahumma ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Allah keep the shadow of Ahlul Bayt over us until we meet them and the Prophet on the Day of Judgment. Allahumma ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Ya Allah, we beg of you, Ya Kareem, Ya Arhamar Rahimin, that those that organize this, that work hard to make this happen, that they wait patiently and they make this happen. Ya Allah, people don't know who they are. You know who they are. Ya Allah, reward them with the best of rewards. Ya Allah, the khuddam of Islam in High Wycombe, in the UK, in the West, in the world, wherever these khuddam are, these servants are, Ya Allah, accept them as your servants, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Make them the servants of your court, the court of your Habib, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Ya Allah, raise them on the Day of Judgment amongst the servants of the Prophet ﷺ. Make that our honor on the Day of Judgment, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Ya Allah, we beg of you, Ya Allah, raise us as servants of your Habib on the Day of Judgment. Allahumma ameen Ya Rabbal Alameen. Bi jahin Nabil Kareem Taha wa Yasin. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Ila hadrat al-Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam wa ila الأنبياء جميعا، وإلى الأصحاب وأهل البيت وإلى أولياء أمة الحبيب صلى الله عليه وسلم، خصوصا إلى سيدنا ومولانا وإمامنا وقدوتنا الشيخ عبد القادر الجيلاني. الفاتحة. السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة
بارك
الله.
الله
Inshallah, we can end with a few nasheed, inshallah. And then Mullah Shams is here, and the way he remembers me is by one that is Will Layla. So I'll try to do that, inshallah, today as well. أنت فينا أنت فينا أنت فينا لا نعذب يا حبيبي وأنت فينا أنت فينا أنت فينا أنت فينا لا نعذب يا حبيبي وأنت فينا مولد الهادي نبينا يصلح القلب الحزين من به حقا هدينا الحبيب مولينا بينا أنت فينا أنت فينا أنت فينا لا نعذب يا حبيبي وأنت فينا كل من زار المقام فالنبي راد السلام يعرف الأحباب تماما بشروا زورنا بينا أنت فينا أنت فينا أنت فينا لا نعذب يا حبيبي وأنت فينا والليلة عندكم عين يا حبابي يا مولد رسول الله خير البرية والليلة عندكم عين يا أهل المدينة مولد رسول الله خير البرية يا زائر المصطفى سلم عليهم يا زائر المجتبى سلم عليهم تسوى العمر كله شمت ايديهم حمزة يا ابو عمارة أسد عليهم أبو الزهرة جدنا يا الهاشمية والليلة عندكم عين يا حبابية مولد رسول الله خير البرية اسمع مدح طه واسمع كلامه يا المحب أنا أعطيك أكبر علامة تلقى النبي واقف يوم القيامة على الكوثر يناديك يا المحب ليا والليلة عندكم عين يا حبابية مولد رسول الله خير البرية والليلة عندكم عين يا حبابية مولد رسول الله خير البرية اللهم صل على محمد يا ربي صل عليه وسلم اللهم صل على محمد يا ربي صل عليه وسلم إن كيل زرتم بما رجعتم إن كيل زرتم بما رجعتم يا أكرم الخلق ما نكون اللهم صل على محمد يا ربي صل عليه وسلم اللهم صل على محمد يا ربي صل عليه وسلم كونوا رجعنا بكل خير واجتمع الفرع والأصول اللهم صل على محمد يا ربي صل عليه وسلم اللهم صل على محمد يا ربي صل عليه وسلم. صلى الله على طه خير الخلق وأهلها. صلى الله على طه خير الخلق وأهلها. نور محمد صلى الله عليه صلاة الله. Humble footsteps do we seek, His shade comes all our needs. Trees, stones, souls do weep. يا ربي صل على النبي. صلى الله على طه خير الخلق وأهلها. نور محمد صلى الله عليه صلاة الله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله صلى الله عليه.
مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم.
أمن تذكر جيران بذي سلامي ما زجت دمعا جرى من مقلة بدمي.
مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم.
أم حبت الريح من تلقاء كاذمة أو مضى البرق في ذا الماء من عدم.
مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم.
فما لعينيك إن قلت اكففاها متى، وما لقلبك إن قلت استفيق يا همي.
مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم.
أيحسب الصب أن الحب منكتم ما بين منسجم منه ومضطرم.
مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم.